first of all, we want to look at kata, and it's interesting because somebody made a comment about kata, and as you know, it's very, very divided.
Yeah.
Some people love it, some people don't like it, some people swear that kata is a waste of time, and when you have certain professional karate fighters who go into kickboxing or something and don't do any kata but do very well in the kickboxing anyway, well, it's a good argument that the kata training isn't effective. On the other hand, you have people who have uh, incredible experience outside the ring and inside reality, in the street, in military, in self-defense situations. And it's in those places that kata tends to hold its own even better because of the nature of the 360-degree movement. What do you think?
I tend to agree. And something that we've discussed off camera before, and I guess we'll raise it now, is it's so easy for people to look at kata within martial arts and people who are outside of martial arts and see it as a potential waste of time and it's not reality and so on. But from a grappling point of view, often when learning different techniques, there's solo drills. I mean, Professor John Danaher has a solo drilling video on grappling. And if you watch that, the solo drills, they look pretty silly. If you're honest, you'd look at it and go, that stuff doesn't work. But if your body is, if he's doing those drills on you, believe me, it works. And you're going to know about it and be tapping very soon.
This is the thing. So it just depends how you treat the kata and do you pressure test it. That's one avenue. The other avenue is when you look back at in the era of the sword in Japan, there was no space for slipping up. It's not like you go out and, with a record of 32 wins and 4 losses,
4 deaths.
You only ever got 1 loss in those days. It was like with a record of 32 wins and then he lost. Rest in peace. But then you had got Yagyu Mune, the warriors that come to mind in particularly Yagyu Munenori, Yamaoka Teshu, of course, and Miyamoto Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi is very well known. It's said that in the last half of his life, he gave away using a live blade and just used a wooden blade. Then you have Yagyu Munenori, who his Shin Kage-ryu style, I believe. You can fact check me if you want. I'm not trying to pretend I know what I'm talking about. I'm just bringing back old memories from 10, 30, 20, 30, 40 years ago. He developed the Shin Kage-ryu and also the whole idea of the no sword. And Yamaoka Teshu, who is my favorite hero samurai, if you like, he was renowned as he was in the late 19th century. He was renowned as a sword fighter who didn't use a sword. So he'd be challenged and he'd walk out with no sword. And he goes, his sword is, well, why do I need a sword? I don't need a sword. And he got to the point where the mind was so well trained that he could read the movements of his opponent even as the opponent would do it. And Mitch was just mentioning the recent UFC fight with Duplessis.
Yeah, DDP and Chimaev.
Yep, Chimaev on the weekend. And Duplessis said later, it was almost as though he knew what I was going to do.
Yeah. While they were wrestling, Chimaev had an answer for him every time they were grappling, every time he was inside control, every time he was in crucifix and stuck there. He couldn't get out because Chimaev's wrestling is so incredible and his feel is so amazing that DDP had no answer to it. It's like he knew what DDP was going to do before he did it.
And this is not uncommon in all different rule sets too. You have wrestlers like Dan Gable, who, his achievement at the Olympics in 72 is he went the entire Olympic campaign without losing a point. Well, that's like if you could imagine going the entire football season and beating everyone without being scored against. It's phenomenal. And then you even have modern day wrestlers like Carl Sanderson and Sadyleyev from Russia. And then you go into modern day kendo, where I remember Nakakura Sensei at 10th Dan. He came out to the Queensland Kendo Renmei, and they were training at the same places where our dojo was. And he was probably in his 70s, and he was intuitively out moving current national champions in their 20s and 30s.
Incredible.
You know, so all that is the mind. And I remember reading a letter that Tokugawa, I think it was Mitsu, so the third Tokugawa, wrote to his swordmaster, and he said, look, I understand that swordsmanship is nothing else except learning how to control the mind. So I want you to help me to do that. So when you see that these masters had this incredible control, and then you look at karate training and you ask yourself, how do you get that control? Before you can get that deep mind control, you have to be doing training that affects it. And the number one source of training, first of all, is deep concentration. Doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to get that mind control without deep concentration. And then you look at kata, and that deep concentration that's required not only to do the technique with speed and control, but also with technical efficiency, proficiency, and perfection. It's the kata that takes your mind deeper and deeper and deeper into concentration. And so I think if, like Benny the Jet says, fighting is 90% in the mind, everything that we do, the muscles are controlled by the mind. It's the willpower that controls movement. And even Solsai used to teach very much, and it kind of touches on the subject we want to get into later, which is about breath control, meditation, all that sort of thing. But Solsai pointed out that unless you're actually getting control of the mind and the breath, you're really not fulfilling your obligation, if you like, as a martial artist. And so I think often kata are maligned. People look at it and go, oh, that's a waste of time. That's really stupid. And like Solsai said, without the mind control and without the focus, it's just like a dance. It's nothing. It's just a performance. And there you have people whose kata are really beautiful, and they're winning kata competitions because their focus is on winning the competition. It's not on taking the mind to any deep control. And you look at people whose kata is deeply meditative and deeply controlled, and it is very much deeply concentrated. I've got a feeling they're not going to win many kata contests because it's just not what the kata judges are looking for, you know. Yet on the other hand, like Mitch says, you look at fighting systems and fighting arts which are more pressure tested. And of course, the thing that comes to mind is things like wrestling and BJJ, because it's pressure tested 100% because there's no impact. You can pressure test a lot easier without impact than you can with impact. This is one of the problems with karate, is that if you want to pressure test something 100%, you're just going to get injured. You'll injure people and they'll get injured and so on. And you'll get injured as well. So that's the difficulty, is when you're dealing with impact fighting systems, how do you go from training safely to training with 100% realism? And this is where kata came in, the whole idea of kata. And of course, you look back 50 years or 40 years, it was a combination of kata and, if you like, conditioning and breaks. So the whole idea of the breaks was to show that, yes, you could generate a certain amount of power in your techniques, but then people took that too far and just became specialists in breaking. They couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag, but gee, they could break some bricks, you know. Whereas at a time when, you know, there was no controlled fighting in rings with judges and referees and so on, well, the only way they could do that was like a real fight or breaking things. It's a challenge, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, I think.
But then we look at, you know, you see the number one, recognized number one BJJ coach in the world today is arguably, in no-gi anyway, John Danaher. And during COVID, he puts out a video called Solo Skills, Solo Training, you know. And if you look at those videos, it's like he's doing kata. He said, well, here's a footwork drill. And what you do here is you move your feet and the foot. And it's a kata. It's just a kata. And a kata literally means taking that form of movement and following a certain flow. And so, and then you look at kickboxers and boxers, you know, and they shadow spar. and they'll spend a certain number of rounds moving around using their imagination, and shadow sparring is a form of kata. And then you have, when they're shadow sparring, their coach may say, do a certain combination. Let's see a 1-1-2-3, rotate 2 again, or something like this. They're doing set combinations, or in other words, they're doing a kata. So I think it's very easy to get into the kata and convince yourself that you're actually doing real karate. But kata without having pressure tested is not real karate. That's what's also called dance karate. It's just a nice, pretty series of movements. If that's what you're doing, great. If that's your objective, is health, longevity, all that sort of stuff, get movement through your body, fix up your spine, all that's wonderful. But when someone says that's not karate, you can't really say, yes, it is. You go, well, yeah, you could be right. It's just a form of training that I'm doing. The other thing too is the beauty of karate is that as you get past your professional fight period, if you like, your strong youthful period of competition, if you're into competition, it's kata that sustains you into your 60s and 70s and 80s and so on. And that, it doesn't matter which scientist who's involved in movement studies you look at. The whole key to health and longevity is movement.
Yeah, if you don't use it, you lose it.
That's right. And kata, certain kata that have tension movements, sanshin, tensho, certain movements, all the kata that I love have this very strong retraction and contraction, so the scapular retraction and the expansion, contraction of the body. There's so much in kata beyond just the notion that you're rehearsing a fight. If you want to do that, though, I did go through 4 stages that I look at when you do kata. And I think it's very important that sometimes you break it down. And bunkai literally means to compartmentalize, to break it apart. So when you have the applications of a kata, it's not just here you do this, okay, in the next movement you do that. It's bunkai means to compartmentalize it. So you might break the kata apart and you might say, well, let's just look at the first 4 movements, or let's just look at these 3 movements here. And then you drill that so that it becomes an unconscious competence sort of thing. And I think that's where the real value of kata is. We just wanted to mention that because a lot of people say that there is no point and no value in kata. But, sitting on a sofa or sitting on a mat while you're stretching, visualizing doing certain things is a form of kata. It's a solo drill that you're doing, and then you get up and you pressure test it. And that's where the value of kata comes in. The problem is, I'd say 90% of the dojos that practice kata don't take it beyond that first level. And the first level is simply doing the sequence of movements according to what they should be. Block, punch, block, punch, block, punch, punch, punch. That's the most superficial level, if you like. It's the kindergarten level. And then you got to take it through the years. You got to take it, and it may take years, I've mentioned this, I'm sure, years ago. There's a Chinese bamboo, and that bamboo, you plant the seed and water it. And for a year, nothing happens. In the second year, you keep watering it, but still nothing happens. And in the third year, you keep watering it still, and still you don't see anything. The fourth year, again, you still see nothing. You water and water, but you still see nothing.
This is 4 years. Yeah, that's a lot of time.
And then sometime in the 5th year, when it finally shoots, it grows approximately 30 meters in 5 or 6 weeks. So it's actually growing 5 meters a week, if you like, which is 360, about 5 meters a week. So in those years where there was no perceptible growth, the roots were just developing this unbelievable underground system so that when finally it shot up, it was stable. And that's a little bit like kata. You do the kata and you give it repetition and repetition, repetition, and you keep doing it. You focus your mind and you stay focused. It's not like I'm going to pump out, 10 kata today and go ba, 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 ba. Sometimes you're better off doing 2 kata that are really, really deeply focused. But you may not see anything for 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years, but those roots are digging deep and deep and deep. And then you'll find whether they're working or not under pressure sometime after that. So I think that's a very important analogy there. Let's have a look at the messages. Looking forward to this episode and getting your thoughts on this. Yeah, kata. Oh, okay, sorry, I had it in the title there. Sorry about that. The grappling angle I've done the past 3 years has opened up a beautiful order where things live with kata practice. The ashiwaza, the hikite concept is that. Maybe it just did a natural change. Stances, footwork, gripping. Yeah, I mean, that's true, Paddy. And the thing you'll find is we talk about it all the time, that a lot of applications don't have real world significance unless you're grabbing, unless you're pulling, unless you're tying people up, breaking balances, sweeping them. I mean, things like that. Even this whole movement, for example, the kung fu movement, you come around here like this, I mean, that's a really fantastic movement when someone shoots in for a low single and we're not allowed to impact them. In grappling. So we learn other ways to deal with a low single shot. Whereas a karate, if someone comes in a karate go with a low single, he's just going to go here and just go, and then, burst eardrums, hit one side, hit the other side like that. It's just, it's a different world when you apply karate applications from kata in a grappling session. That's very true. The question is, I guess, what are you doing kata for? Or Sensei Mike? What do you expect to get from it, and who you're fighting, your own inability to control your own body and mind, or someone else? I think that's a really important point as well. I mean, everything Mike says is excellent. But once again, it comes down to that. What do you fight? What are you training for? What are you training to be a killer, or are you training to be fit and healthy? And like Ankoi Tosu says, karate you can train karate to develop really strong skills, or you can train karate for health and fitness. Just be clear which one you're doing, because they're very different propositions. Well, the kata is exactly the same. You can do kata, like I said, certain movements. For example, if you're coming up here and doing these large movements, well, you've got that strong scapular retraction there, and you've got stretching through the spine. It's beautiful for health and well-being. At the same time, if you know what you're doing and you're looking at ways to use those techniques and you develop them, like Paddy says, when you grapple, all of a sudden you've got these here. I just love these movements here, and they lead into arm drags and everything like we did recently.
Yeah, I remember just a couple of weeks ago, we were grappling and someone had a grip, and it was difficult to break with a lapel grip. And you said, you can break it the karate way, but you're not supposed to do it in jiu-jitsu. And it was like, you'll be pulling Ken or whatever, and just jigging the knuckles into the back of the hands and all that. And I'm like, yeah. You forget there's so many applications from karate.
Well, that's right. And also, unnoticed. Exactly. Another thing that Soulside pointed out to me once too is someone grabs you with two hands, both hands are busy. So you just uppercut them. And these are the sort of things which, when you separate rule sets, then you lose connection between a lot of these things. I think that's very important to remember. I think kata helps to create subliminal responses in unpredictable situations. Well, yeah, subliminal response, another way of saying mushin, or no mind. You're reacting without thought. And like any good tournament fighter will know, is as soon as you start to think about what you have to do, well, you pretty well lost the fight against a high-level guy. That's true. Global. Us, good to see you, Mac. Us. Ashihara katas have the look of shadow boxing, especially that one. Yeah, that's a good point. I like the Ashihara kata as well. It's kind of like, I think it's kind of like a level 3. If we have 4 levels of kata training that I work on, and level 3 basically is freeing up and working the bunkai applications. And Ashihara karate kind of did that. they went away from the stiff, what is commonly seen as stiff movement. I don't think you should throw the baby out with the bathwater, though. Don't just get rid of everything, because you lose a lot when you do that, particularly in postural development and posture control and well-being over time, as well as a lot of other things, joint integrity and so on. But the Ashihara Kata, the kata, I love the way they're just like these sort of movements that they're turning and moving. They're very beautiful. And that's like level 3 kata should be doing that. When you take kata through towards the full potential of it, it actually starts to resemble that sort of thing, that's for sure. For me, kata helps maintain my mobility and focus on techniques under the stress of sparring. Well, that's true too. I remember in the 1980 Nationals, I had no one to spar with, so I was just doing kata. And I remember in that Nationals, I'm doing things sometimes that are straight out of kata. It really was a big thing. And Roland, of course, Roland's no spring chicken anymore. I've forgotten how old you are, but I always, the only thing I remember is you always look 10 years younger than you really are. But maybe it helps to, that training that you're doing gives you mobility through your body. And I always believe that one of the first things to go as you get old is your spinal mobility and flexibility. And so if you can maintain that, it always keeps you quite youthful. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is under stress. When you go under stress, one of two things happens, I think. You overthink it, or your mind calms down and you don't think it at all. And then all of a sudden, that's where those techniques come out. I think that's a really good point, Roland. I know from my experience a couple of times when I've been cracked in the head pretty hard, it's like suddenly you're not thinking anymore. It's like you tough guy, boom, you go, thank you. Now I can like just get on with what I should have been getting on with, because I was overthinking everything before, and I think that's a good point. Kata can do that. One of my favorites ones from Hunchy John Taylor, his mix of Sanchin Tensho. Everyone has different ways to develop that. I'm not familiar with that particular one, but I think that's a fair call. If you can mix up Sanchin, arguably the yang version, Tensho, the yin version, they balance each other. I think the Go and the Ju of Goju, if you like. If you can, I personally keep them separate, but if you can find ways to create your own kata through movement by combining different aspects of different kata, it's a really beautiful thing. Well, some people get damaged so bad after all the years of training, when you're in your 60s, you can't really do the kata correctly because of limited mobility. Well, that's true too, but you can still change it. And also, you shouldn't limit your movement as a result of damage. You should continue to try and expand the movements despite the damage, so that it becomes a form of rehabilitation.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you limit ranges and limit positions, your body says, okay, no worries, we don't need this anymore, and I won't give it to you anymore, and you lose it. I understand pain and joint damage can do that significantly, but we do want to try and fight to when I say fight, not aggressively, but in a kind way for your body to maintain as much as you can in terms of range and so on.
Yeah. So it's very true that particularly as you get older, not so much injury, but age-related decline in joint health and so on. Yeah, that's a different thing, But I think it's a fair call that you have to respect the fact that as you get into your 60s, particularly, because I know when I was in my 50s, in my early 50s, I felt still training hard and working hard with the young guys. It's only when now I'm in my late 60s that there are things that I have to be very careful of. But at the same time, if you've got injuries, you've got to keep rehabilitating them over time. MP and Basai Dai. Keep doing them then. What's Aaron? I've signed in with my other account. Senpai Al. Yeah, good on you. I can't do karate correctly because of my knees. Well, there you go. I think what you have to do is then find the kata you can do because of your knees, particularly Sanchin and Tensho. I think if you can do a Sanchin stance, you can do Sanchin and Tensho. And that concentration of the mind down into the hara, dropping the weight, getting the postural integrity right, without much movement through your legs. That's the beauty of Sanchin and Tensho. In fact, we had this discussion once with Sensei Mike Clark. There are certain schools of Goju where they do turn, like we do in Kyokushin, and there are certain schools where they don't turn. Well, if you can't turn around, if you find that step across movement is difficult for you to do, Aaron, well then, rather than turn around, just take a step back and then step forward and then work it out. Find a way where you don't even have to turn. You're just simply moving forward and back, but you're still practicing the correct movements as you go through it. I think that's a really beautiful way. And I don't think there's anything wrong at all with people making adjustments to the kata for their own training. Just don't start a whole style of karate based on your theories, because anyway, that's another discussion. But anyway, I think that's a viewpoint that we have on kata. We'll probably get into it more over time, and even with some, we'll even demonstrate some transitions that by transition, I mean transitioning from that traditional concept into the next level where you free up the embusen a little bit, and then the next level where you're actually compartmentalizing it, breaking it down, and then the final level where you're actually working the applications in a pressure testing situation. Yeah, Garyu. Al, what I do with the Garyu is I don't even squat down in the standard Garyu position. I actually kneel down on one knee, because that squat down is a very mobile, explosive position that particularly works well against the low single. So you're in this situation, you squat down low. One of the, I'll have to show you sometime of the application where you drop down low there and you use that as an opportunity to kind of break their concentration and then come back up, and then you can contain them in an inside control position, which otherwise they're not going to let you get. Mitch and I have discussed this. If I was to try and break into Mitch's guard, then come in, get an underhook and an overhook and get chest on chest control, it's just not going to happen. But if I fake down low, go for the low single or the single leg, then come up, well, then the opportunity to penetrate on the inside is much greater. So that's why I think that low squat is very valuable, and particularly the hand movement here where you're actually doing a form of low single. But I find from my experience as I get older, you can still do the same low single by going down on the back knee. Okay, and that's much more manageable for an older person.
And I also highlight, Xian, the importance of level changes as well, just generally. When you go into different ranges, it becomes more important, because in certain fighting sports, it's the same level all the time.
Yeah. And in Kibadachi, well, to be quite honest, I don't even really do Kibadachi anymore. Al, I always stick to Shikodachi, because the foot going from that to that with the feet takes a lot of pressure off the knees. I think a lot of lateral pressure off the knees. And so we just want to have that brief discussion about kata. We wanted to get into breath too. We wanted to mention, we're going to do a video very soon on breath, because I think, when Sosai says, in fact, I've started to do my research on it. It'll take me a couple of weeks. But when Sosai says that though there are karate teachers who ignore breathing or the breath techniques, they are in serious error, because without it, spiritual unity, which in Japanese means shinshin toitsu, just means being able to concentrate deeply, and karate practice are impossible. So basically, Sosai was always adamant that karate is not just about kicking and punching. It's also about a deep inner spiritual unity, personal development, getting your head together, learning how to concentrate. And sometimes, like John Lennon says, life is what happens when you're making plans, and things happen, and no one can divide the nature of the phenomenal duality: happy, sad, glad, mad, hot, cold, good, bad. You can't have one without the other. You don't have a perpetual summer. You have to have variation, and that's the nature of the world. And sometimes we're confronted with challenges and problems and almost insurmountable emotional challenges, you just got to take a breath. I mean, even people who don't train will tell you, just take a deep breath. You know, my wife says to my little 3-year-old, just take a deep breath. You like that, and it'll help you overcome that emotional charge at that moment. So anyway, we're going to get into that in a future edition, I think. But anyway, just for Kata, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let me just say that I think it's very important that you don't kid yourself that by doing Kata, it's a magic bullet and you're invincible. At the same time, I do have friends who have found incredibly powerful application in as real world a situation as you could imagine. And if you can think of the worst real world situations and put yourself in it, that's the sort of place that some people have been able to pressure test their kata. Okay, so like I said, great for physical health, great for fighting. Just be sure which one you're doing, and even in your own training, vary it accordingly. Well, thanks for another sense. Well, by the way, I don't believe there is a right way to do kata. All kata have changed over the years. The notion of right and wrong doesn't exist in Budo. That's a good point, but also it's a very Western point, Mike, because as you know, in Japan, sometimes the Japanese will put blinkers on and will swear black and blue that there is only one right way to do it. And I have two comments about that. One, I think, comes from the great Don Drager. I think it was him, or he mentions it about a very highly credentialed Western judoka came to the Kodokan and he was drilling, solo drilling, doing a certain drill in a certain way. And a very high level master is standing there watching. And when he finished, the master walked over and said, "That's really interesting. Why do you do it like that?" And he said, "Well, that's because that's how my teacher taught me." And the guy looked at him and went, "Oh, I thought you were a lot smarter than that," and walked away. So like Mike says, that even though we're taught in a certain way, of course, there's no point in changing for the sake of change, but you also have to recognize that the kata, if you like, is just encapsulating a certain concept. And if you find that changing it in a certain way to suit you is better, then it doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it more right for you. The other comment that I wanted to make about that is Solsai's comment where he said there is only one right way to do any technique. But if the way you do it knocks him out, that's the right way. I think that's very, very important. Our school all naturally breathe together when we do kata. It helps us keep pace and stay together. You mentioned spiritual unity. We feel like almost, well, that's how it should be. That's a good point, Aaron. The other thing what I do is when I start teaching kata to white belts, I'll say with ki. So it's not just ki at the 2 points of the kata. If it's a 20 move kata, we do 20 ki's. And after 2 or 3 movements, you'll find that everybody coordinates their breath through the ki. Hut, 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 hut. You get that rhythmic movement, whereas normally it may be more difficult. And then after you do that a couple of times with a ki on every technique, you stop the ki and do the ki in the normal place, and you'll find that people's breathing has coordinated much better. Us, thanks, guys. Thanks, Mitch. Good to see everybody. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for coming. Us.